Hello, and welcome back to Enjoy Parenting, the podcast where we try to teach you how to get more enjoyment out of one of the best values life has to offer your own kids. I'm Kyle Steele, head of school at VanDamme Academy and father of two. And my co host is Lisa VanDamme, the founder of VanDamme Academy and mother of four. And the title for today's podcast is The Pursuit of Your Child's Happiness. So, Lisa, this is your topic that you wanted to discuss today. Why don't you introduce what led you to bring this up?
Sure. I'll recreate the steps that led me to this topic. And then really I bring it up not to offer some authoritative insights on the topic, but sort of to get your thoughts and feedback on the questions that have arisen in my own mind. So last week we had some visitors to VanDamme Academy, 3 people who were interested in possibly starting a school of their own. So they spent the day at the school observing classes and having periodic conversations with me. And at a certain point in the course of the day, I had to abruptly excuse myself for a family emergency because my eldest daughter was in the midst of a panic attack and in serious distress and really needed me in that moment. And I even got in the car to drive up to where she's at school to be with her and had to interrupt this serious and important meeting in the midst of it. So there was a fleeting thought through my head as this was going on that I'm a person who comes on a podcast and talks about parenting, gives advice on parenting. I'm the head of a school at which my children were educated. And the thought that ran through my head was, would this undermine their belief in my credibility as someone who can give them sage advice on parenting and education, that my daughter is in the midst of this kind of desperate situation? And now I have to say immediately, there's no reason to believe they thought that. And I'm quite certain they didn't. This was a sort of an anxiety thought going through my head. Yeah. And my daughter is doing absolutely fine, by the way. Just want to establish that as context. And she has had a long struggle with anxiety, which you know. But so this led to a series of thoughts in my head where I thought, okay, if they were evaluating my credibility as someone who could offer advice on parenting or advice on education by that standard, then, my child's overall psychological well-being or general happiness would be the standard that they were using for my success or my virtues as a parent. And it seemed like, well, that probably isn't the right standard to use. And then that led me to the even more interesting thought is, am I in any way defining my success as a parent by that standard? And if I do, what are the hazards or dangers of defining my success in that way, of saying, is my child's, general state of happiness what proves my success as a parent, or validation of my success as a parent? So that was one question. The other question was, to what extent is it even appropriate to make happiness the goal of parenting? You and I talk a lot about not setting achievement goals for your success as a parent, that you don't need your child to do, accomplish, look like, be a certain sort of person in order to feel like a success as a parent. But it seems like an easy substitute for that would be, no, I just want my child to be happy. And that sounds on the surface like a worthwhile goal, but it feels to me like there's a lot of hazards in setting happiness as the goal too. So This was a roundabout way trying to recreate the steps of asking the question, what are the hazards of setting happiness as your goal, your child's happiness as a goal for parenting? And what are the hazards of measuring your success as a parent by the standard of your child's happiness? And what might the alternative be?
Yeah. So it's a really awesome topic. And I've basically, since you introduced that topic, I've just been thinking about it in every spare second I've got, because it's very fun to kind of chew on. A few things that occur to me at the outset. One is that I can't think of anyone like that's a sort of philosopher that says your child's happiness is the goal. So
Mhm.
this is more of a default thing that people turn to, not necessarily like a clear intellectual position that someone out there holds. You can find people that advocate for achievement as the goal of parenting, or
Hmm.
good citizenship, or being a good Christian. Like I think of Amy Chua's Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom as being a more contemporary example of someone having as a stated intellectual position, your child's achievement is what you should care about as a parent.
Yes.
But I can't think, and I'm sure that there are people out there, like there's kind of nothing new under the sun, you might say, but I can't think of a large intellectual contention that says you just let your child be happy. And so it's easy to it's hard for us to kind of define what that means to say I just want my child to be happy, because that's not a philosophical position. It's usually a default utterance, usually coming
Mhm.
from a place of frustration. um,
Mhm.
and then it would be easy for us to straw man this position, like, well, you just want your child to be happy. Does that mean you're just going to give them
Sure.
TikTok and porn and candy all day long? Or like, what does that mean? And you can find horror stories like that out there of parents that just want their kids to be happy and let
Indulge. Mhm.
become degenerate. Um, but if we set that kind of naive happiness idea aside and think, what would a more sophisticated version of this be? That's where it kind of gets more challenging. What would a sophisticated person say they mean when they're saying, I just want my child to be happy? They might have like a lot of riders on that. Like, I want them to be happy in a way that won't be dangerous to them. I want them to be happy in a way that won't cause long-term harm to them. It's not risky.
I want
But
them to be happy in kind of an enduring, long range, fulfilled sort of way, not a superficial, pleasure oriented way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's like a good placeholder for the position that we're talking about. And I see. So I don't want to monologue here too much, but I've just been
No,
thinking
please.
about it. I've got a lot of
Yeah.
ideas cooking. I see two main problems with this. One is that it is, I would say, impossible for you to achieve your goal.
Yeah.
And then similar but related, it's not within your control.
Mhm.
So it's impossible because you can't be happy for someone else. You
Mhm.
can't pursue someone else's happiness.
Mm.
Happiness is an evaluation. It's the emotion that comes from an evaluation that you are achieving your goals or you're on the path to achieving your goals. That your values are coming into your life. And you can't make that evaluation for someone else, as you as a senior parent, like, or a senior parent, a veteran parent. Senior
Yeah,
parent
it's all
is,
right. I had geriatric pregnancies. I can handle senior parent.
but you know what it's like to look at your child's life and they feel bad about it, and you're like, what do you mean you feel bad about it? You've got a great life. How can you be scared of this or worried about this or angry about this? You can't plug your evaluations into their head,
Right.
and you don't. So it's impossible for you to make someone else happy, at least in that long-term enduring sense. And it's also outside your locus of control, because their happiness is going to depend on their choices, not your choices, or it's going to depend on things completely outside of their control. Like, you can't control who breaks their heart. You can't control who hires them or not. You can't control
Their
uh,
biology.
their biology, yeah, and their neurochemistry, or their overall health.
Mhm.
And so, setting happiness, your child's happiness, as a goal, I think is fraught with a lot of problems. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I think it comes from a well-meaning place that you want your child to like their life.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's usually what comes when someone says, I don't want to force an image of achievement onto them. And so then this is a fallback position. But there's a lot of weaknesses. It doesn't actually do what you want a goal to do. A goal should clarify your actions, and
Right.
saying you want your child to be happy doesn't clarify what actions you're going to take as a parent.
Will it interrupt the flow of your thoughts if I ask a question here? Okay, so does it fundamentally change the nature of the goal if you say, my goal is to empower them with the tools to live a happy life, because that is within your control. I mean, it's within your control to create those opportunities and to offer them that guidance. So, and then happiness is still a central part of the goal, but it's not the end goal, which does seem to change how you would evaluate your success and how you would go about trying to take steps toward the achievement of that goal.
Yeah, I think that that's getting much closer to a healthier goal, because what I had written down, kind of like what would my alternative be, is something like, I want to prepare them for adulthood and I want to enjoy my relationship with them. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to have two goals simultaneously, but I think those two goals are pretty harmonious with each other. Mm-hmm. And so, preparing them for adulthood it comes from this is something that we've said quite a lot, especially in our earlier episodes. You got to recognize what the nature of childhood is. And our joke is that children are ignorant and incompetent, that they don't know anything about the world and they don't have any abilities in the world. And so the nature, that fact of reality conditions what parenting is. And what parenting is making it so that they're not ignorant, so that they're not incompetent, so that they have skills and abilities and knowledge such that they can be human, that they can live a full life. And I think that incorporating happiness into that idea of what it means to be a full human is indispensable. So, you're judging yourself as a parent is not. So let's go back to your daughter for a second. It's not so much, does she feel happiness? That's not what you judge by. It's, does she have the ability to manage the feelings that she has? Does she know? Because God knows life is going to throw all kinds of experiences at her that she's going to evaluate in all kinds of different ways and have all kinds of different emotions.
Right.
And so it's, does she have the tools and ability to manage those things as they come up? Does she know what to do when she's feeling intense anxiety? And I do think your daughter does. Those have been hard fought for lessons over at least the decade and a half I've known her. And does she know how to, not just in an acute panic attack, what to do, but does she know how to design her life generally around the fact that she's prone to anxiety? And I think that she does have those skills. So, sorry, I'm going on.
Since you know my child very well, I think it's, you and I can both say that if these guests that I was talking about could suddenly glimpse the essence of that child, they would be coming to me for advice constantly. Saying, how do you produce a human like this? Because she is, I regard her, and I think most people who know her do, as a truly exceptional human being, in no small part because of all the things you just mentioned. I mean, the fact of having panic attacks, I mean, I have, I'm sure many of our listeners have. This is not a statement of character to experience anxiety or to have gone through a period of panic. And all of the, nor does it define your happiness, whether, I mean, that's an interesting aspect of this too, is that having anxiety or having periods of panic in your life doesn't negate the possibility of an overall happiness, which can be a hard thing to keep in focus when you're a parent, because you're so absorbed in that single moment of their life, and it's so easy to extrapolate to the whole of their life from that. But anyway, I think, in terms of having as a goal to empower them to be self-aware about their own psychological state, to not project what they're feeling on the people around them in a way that creates a hostility with the world around them, which is what a lot of kind of unself-aware people with psychological struggles do, I think, to set up your life in a way that makes it generally fulfilling and stable and joyful. And, those are the things that make for a look of happiness, or a life of happiness on a big scale.
Yeah. And like this is tying into what we were talking about last time. There can even be places where an anxious personality could be an asset. You know, I don't want a lackadaisical accountant. I, I would like an accountant that is sensitive to imperfection,
Mhm.
let's say. So, you know, there's ways that your personality is something that you need to overcome, but also something you need to exploit. So uh, now I had a question or just an interesting scenario to run past you along these lines.
Mhm.
That let's take a kind of classic scenario that your child takes piano lessons and they don't want to practice piano.
Mhm.
We can kind of picture avatars for different perspectives and how they would respond to it. Like the performance oriented and the achievement oriented parent would say they have to practice the piano. Like I will get them to practice the piano, whether it involves bribes or punishments or downright abuse. They will practice the piano because that is what they need to do. They need to achieve. And we could imagine kind of the naive happiness parents saying like, well, it doesn't make them happy, so I'm not going to have them practice the piano. Like,
Right.
why am I going to impose that on them?
Mhm.
And so my question is, how would a more sophisticated person approach that? How do you address the fact that um, practicing the piano makes your child miserable right now? And how do you cope with those feelings? And where do you go from there? Like, what's your advice for that kind of scenario in light of this discussion that we're having? Kind of putting
Yeah.
you on the spot there.
Oh no, that's great. I'm sure you have thoughts on that too. So, but what comes to mind immediately is that if you, what was your description of childhood? Ignorant and
Incompetent.
incompetent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the ignorance and incompetence, what that looks like in that moment is possibly they have not learned what it feels like to overcome a reluctance to do something in the moment, to gain skills over the long term, and to experience the real satisfaction of having persisted at something and derived great fulfillment from it. So what we would ideally be trying to do is bringing the wise adult perspective to them, helping them explicitly through conversation, through description, through explanation, helping them to conceptually understand that challenge. So rather than just forcing them with holding a whip over them, you must practice, or just letting them out of it without any encouragement at all, nurturing through an explanatory relationship or something that that depends on their respect for your wisdom and authority, and will prompt them to hear you out on it. Now that doesn't mean they'll just hear the explanation and automatically do what you want them to do, but so there can be a little bit of, well, I know you don't feel like it right now, but for the reasons I've explained to you, this is what I need you to do right now. And then conscientious reevaluation on the part of the parent to make sure that your wisdom is sound. I think that's the other part of it too. I think I've told the story on some episode about forcing Lana through ballet lessons when she was 4. And having that in mind, that I didn't want her to give up too easily. If she sticks it out, she might really enjoy it. She's just shy and she needs to overcome her shyness, and then she'll feel. And those were all the thoughts in my head. But then over time, I came to the conclusion that she just really did not like ballet. And she was perfectly happy to do all those things in another realm. She just didn't want to do this particular activity. So I had to be open to reassessment and reevaluation from my end too. But like the mentor, the wise mentor guidance model, I don't know how you want to turn that into an avatar, but that's what strikes me as the third alternative there.
Yeah. Well, your answer matches a lot of what I was thinking. I didn't really organize an answer to this, but it matches what I'm thinking, that it's a little bit of a trick question, right? That you can't just say, oh, well, here's what you do when your kid doesn't want to practice piano. Like it depends on a lot of different factors. It depends on the age of the child. How far are they into this session of piano lessons? What are the conditions surrounding the practice right now? But the overall advice is not here's what you do when they don't want to practice piano. The overall advice is make sure that you know your kid and your kid likes you. And then you're going to be able to come up with ideas in that moment. Like if you're a parent that's constantly on business trips, you don't know your kid very well, they don't like you very much, and you're facing the problem that they don't want to practice piano, there's no right answer there. There's no, you're not going to be able to figure out, like, is this a situation where they've given it a good try and they should just abandon it? Or is this a situation where you have superior wisdom and you can say to them, like, I know you don't want to do it, but I just want, even if you just sit here in silence for 20 minutes, I want you to stick this out. Or maybe they're at the right age where you can say, listen, you made a commitment to do a month of this. So this is the way that I picture doing this. It's theoretical for me now. Isaac's 2. But I want to have defined off ramps ahead of time that, you're signing up for soccer, and that means you're part of the team for the season. Unless someone is beating you up on the field, you can't quit. If my child is not old enough to understand that commitment, I'm not going to sign them up for soccer. Or say, like, mom and dad have already given this piano teacher a month's worth of tuition, so you're here for a month unless she's abusing you. So
the off ramps are a great technique because they set an endpoint in the child's head. If they really don't want to go through with it, they prolong the commitment long enough for them to feel out whether continuation will make them change their mind about whether they want to go through with it. If I combine what you said and what I said, know your kid, make sure your kid likes you. Be a person, make sure they like you because you're a person worth listening to. I mean, so much of this is just, you are a good role model who has a good relationship with them. And if that's true, a lot of it happens naturally from there. And then be sure you are observant and attentive and creative and thoughtful in your communication of these lessons. There's an art to, not, Heimgenodt has so much wisdom about this, but to not just lecturing them or condescending to them. Part of the establishment of a good relationship and of clear communication is there are ways to persuade the child that don't put you in a position of reducing yourself down to their level and negotiating with them, but taking their nature and their developmental stage seriously in a way that allows you to communicate it in terms that they can hear and understand.
Notice that none of this conversation has anything to do with their happiness or unhappiness. What we're talking about is you need to, one, make sure that you are wise in this realm. You can't ask your child to be better than you. And 2, you need to know a lot about your child in this situation. And so the happiness or unhappiness of the child is not that relevant to a lot of decisions. And I think in some ways, unhappiness is a weird thing to say, but you'll get what I mean. Unhappiness is a more useful tool to a parent than happiness. Because unhappiness is pretty clearly a sign that something needs your attention. But happiness could be a more confusing signal. There could be happiness that's healthy and happiness that's unhealthy, but unhappiness is pretty much always a sign that something needs attention in some way. The how do you handle the fact that your kid can't practice piano or doesn't want to practice piano? Make sure you're really good at those commitments. Are you the kind of person that quits easily and you hate that about yourself? Are you the person that gets overcommitted and you hate that about yourself? Like, unless you have wisdom in that realm, it's going to be really hard for you to bestow wisdom in that realm.
Robert has a comment here I'd like to read and have a thought about it. He said, my mother once told me one of the most painful things to endure is seeing your child being deeply unhappy with their life. That was tough to hear. Of course, we as parents want to see our children happy. So in that sense, it is a goal. It's just not helpful to define our goal in those terms. And yes, there is nothing more painful than seeing your child unhappy. I think every healthy parent would much rather take on the burden of unhappiness from their child than ever see their child unhappy or suffering. So what I was thinking, one observation I have from my own experience that may be useful to people is, to the extent I tell myself my child has to be happy, like that's the goal, and I need my child to be happy. Anytime I see, this is easiest to communicate in regard to my adult children. If my daughters are struggling with something and feeling for a period really unhappy, it's very dangerous for me to have the attitude in my mind that can't be, that's something that in my subconscious is telling me I'm a failure as a parent, or in my subconscious is telling me this is an overall statement of their existence. Because to the extent I allow that thinking in my life, I handle that situation very badly. And all of the things we were just talking about what our roles and our goals as parents should be, of giving them advice, offering wisdom, supporting a relationship with them, having affection, being observant, the things that really are central. If there's a voice in your head saying, no, they can't be unhappy, that's a disaster, and that proves something negative about me, then you're not going to be in a position of giving all of those, of providing all those aspects of parenting that really are your responsibility in that situation. So it's hard to see your kids, it's really hard to see your kids unhappy. And there's a certain way in which you have to be very welcoming of that experience so that you can do a good job of helping them through those periods of unhappiness.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to, you just have to really keep clear what unhappiness is. It's an emotion, it's an evaluation,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be right, it could be wrong, but the fundamental is not the evaluation, it's the facts on the ground that you need to address. And so if you are seeing your child is deeply unhappy with their life, what matters most is not that they formed that evaluation. What matters most is, what did they form that evaluation on the basis of? There's an economic analogy here that, like, if the stock market crashes, the problem is not that everyone stopped believing in the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that there's probably bad assets in the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
And so what needs to be addressed, not that there's anyone that addresses the economy as a whole, but what's necessary for that economy is to have better assets, not to start believing in stock prices again. We have just a minute or two left, and I had a follow-up to something that you said earlier, unless there's more on this topic.
No.
It's a really fun topic. It's very interesting to think through. You had raised the question last time. I can't remember. I think it was in the episode, not in the clubhouse, of how to talk to your kids about COVID being over, because there's a sense in which COVID is not really over, or that it will never be over, and that there's this weird ambiguity that's hard to explain to kids. And I think I found a way to explain it. I've been using it on adults, and it's pretty effective. So it'll hopefully work for kids. I remind them that originally this wasn't called COVID. Originally, this was called novel coronavirus. And in our heads, we've been thinking it's the coronavirus that will go away. But that's not what's happening. It's the novelty that is going away. So it's not that COVID is disappearing. It's that it's our relationship to it has changed. A year ago, like 10%, 20% of the population had antibodies, whether natural, and there was no vaccine. It was just natural. Or there was very little vaccine out there. And now like 90+% of the population has antibodies from one way or another. This is not a novel coronavirus anymore. So you got to get into a little bit of biology to explain that to them. But I think that that's a good way to explain it to them that doesn't feel like, it won't create as much cognitive dissonance, that this is something that is not new to us. And it was the newness that was so dangerous before. So,
yeah, I think that's a good way to explain it. And I just want to, what brought the question up in the first place was my feeling that I ought to say to my kids that that COVID is over, or that the COVID era is over. And I still think that that's an important milestone for people to reach.
yeah.
Whatever point in time you're going to choose to, or manner in which you're going to explain that to your child, I do think it's important to say it explicitly, that they can think of they can think of this as being something behind them in their world and not defining the world as they know it anymore.
Yeah.
So I think we've reached that point.
I certainly have. I don't know about the rest of you people, but I think. Well, all right. I think we should end it there and head over to Clubhouse. Yeah.
Yes. See you there.
All right. See ya.
Bye.